Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with Craig on this fine Sunday morning, October 22nd. Obviously, this is pre-recorded because it's Sunday morning and I'm chilling, probably at church, probably hanging out, probably enjoying some football. Anyway, whatever it might be, today we're going to talk about, and we're going to have a moment to have a little bit of coffee together. And we're going to talk about, someone who didn't necessarily tell the truth. I know, politicians who don't tell the truth. What are you going to do? Anyway, so today's conversation is going to be in regards to Senator Chris Murphy. He's a Democrat from Connecticut. Those of you from Connecticut know that, it's not exactly the most pro-Second Amendment state in the Union. But here's an individual who has fully and wholly bought into the lies and the propaganda that has been put out there by Every Town to Prevent Gun Violence, or by Michael Bloomberg, and by the Brady campaign, even to the point where he's willing to spew and state misstatements and basically represent things that are not facts to the media. Here's what he had to say on State of the Union on CNN.
You said earlier that you would be willing to allow a clean bill in Congress that bans or regulates bump stocks without having pump stocks, without requiring more broader gun control to be attached to the bill. Is universal background checks the next step, though? You said you'd be willing to separate it. Is universal background checks closing the so-called gun show loophole, requiring background checks for private sales? Is that the next step for people in your philosophical camp in Senate?
It should be the next step, in large part because it is the most popularly accepted change, and it has the biggest effect. What we know is that in states that have universal background checks, gun crimes are reduced by as much as 40%. And there's this fiction that the gun lobby tries to perpetuate, that there are no laws that could stop evildoers from perpetuating the kinds of crimes that we saw in Las Vegas and that we see in Chicago. And that's simply not true. What we know is that states that have tougher gun laws, that keep criminals from getting guns, that keep those dangerous weapons like AR-15s out of the hands of civilians, have dramatically lower rates of gun violence. And so we have plenty of data to tell us that, in fact, if you have tougher gun laws, you will have less gun crime. And what we know is that the most important intervention is background checks. It's the intervention supported by the largest number of Americans. And so, yes, that would be the clear next step. That should be our North Star as we try to figure out how to protect.
All right, so let's break this down real quick. First of all, he talks about AR-15s, and if you have laws limiting access to AR-15s, then that reduces gun violence. There's a fundamental problem here, and the first fundamental problem is that AR-15s largely are not the firearms that are used to commit most gun violence. In fact, mostly it's handguns. Rifles comprise of about 3%, I believe less than 3%. Now, this is all rifles. All rifles comprise about 3% of all of the firearms that are utilized in gun violence. So if it's 3% of firearms that are used in gun violence are in fact long guns, then AR-15s are only a smaller subset of that. So just on the basic information that we have at hand from the CDC, we know that this individual is not telling the truth. Now, there have even been studies. In 2004, Christopher Cooper from George Mason University, they actually did a report analyzing the effects of gun bans on gun crimes. Now, here's what they claim the report did. Now, their whole goal was to say, if you ban guns, it's gonna help reduce crime. And in actuality, that's not what happened. When you banned the guns, it actually didn't reduce gun violence at all. Any tie or any correlation in terms of reductions in gun violence that have been studied, there are so many different ancillary things. For example, in the state of California, We voted to ban guns. We started our earlier, but in the 90s, we started to institute stricter gun laws. And you have a lot of folks here in California who want to claim that, well, that's why gun violence has gone down. But at the same time, you also instituted increased penalties for those who commit crimes, in particular, those who commit violent crimes and those who commit crimes with firearms. Now, as you saw those laws put in place, you also saw crime and violent crime decrease. Now, fast forward to the last 3 years, 2014, 2015, 2016, even into 2017. What you're seeing is something different. You're actually starting to see violent crime and crime in general go up. Well, gee, I wonder why that is. We didn't see a change in gun laws. In other words, well, let me clarify. We did see a change. We saw gun laws get stricter. But wait a minute, but stricter gun laws and yet an increase in violence? That doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense when you take into account that California has also passed laws that have taken things that used to be felonies, turned them into misdemeanors, taken people who were in state prison and put them in county jail, and then released a lot of those folks who are in county jails, released them out into the streets. Now, they say, well, these are nonviolent offenders. Well, nay, 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 I say, because their last crime that they may have been convicted of may not have been a violent crime. But that does not mean that they are not violent offenders. It doesn't mean that they haven't been convicted of violent crimes. In many cases, they have. So what we've seen is that there are other things that go into whether or not gun crimes are being committed other than stricter gun laws. In particular, when we start talking about access to AR-15s or access to certain long guns. Now, mind you, most of the research and most of the data that is out there is easily debunked. If you ever want to get a chance, just go read some of the writings by John Lott. You guys already know who John Lott is. And you'll find that most of the studies and a lot of the information that they're putting out there is easily debunked. But here's the thing, and this is the thing that I'll point out, is that it is so bad, their lies that they told, that this guy tells, are so bad that he eventually would wind up getting 3 Pinocchios from the liberal media. The fact checkers actually gave him 3 Pinocchios for his lies. But what's interesting is that even when the commentator, and this is CNN, even when the commentator calls him on the fact, well, I'll let you see what he calls him on, and then watch what his response is.
But with all due respect, Senator, this horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the gentleman passed his background checks. There didn't seem to be any reason to prevent him from purchasing firearms. There were no mental health issues that we've been told about, at least so far, that would have allowed anybody to block him from buying a gun. I understand the regulation that you're talking about in terms of bump stocks, but what about the fact that, like, none of the laws you seem to be talking about would have necessarily prevented this shooter from shooting? It's just that it might have prevented him from shooting as rapid fire as he did.
Well, I think one of the traps that the gun lobby wants you to get into is...
Now, I may have cut it off a little bit early, but basically what the guy was saying is, he was saying, well, the fallacy and the trap that we fall into is, well, thinking that we can only pass laws that would have prevented the last gun crime. Here's the thing. You cannot step up and say, I want to pass a law that because of what happened in Las Vegas, we need to pass a law that would prevent Las Vegas. And here's my bill, which would have done absolutely nothing to prevent Las Vegas. You can't use that as the reason why we need to do something, why something needs to be changed, when nothing that you're doing would have addressed anything having to do with that particular item, with that particular incident. But they do it all the time. They did it here in California. Whether it really didn't matter. Whether it was dealing with firearms storage, once again, had absolutely nothing to do with any of the mass shootings that took place. But they said we got to do something. We got to do something to stop that mass shooting. Whether it was no matter what it was, time and time again, they never let a good tragedy go to waste. they don't really care about whether or not their bill would have fixed whatever incident. All they want to do is they want to feel like they're doing something. Not something effective, not something productive. They just want to do something. They want to feel like I did something. They want to say I did something. They don't care about the actual impact or effect, whether or not it's effective. They want to know, how do I feel about it? What's my intent? I've had legislators stand up on the floor of the legislature and said, we shouldn't concern ourselves with the details of the language of the bill. We only need to focus on the intent. That is idiocy. And that is the gun-grabbing Democratic Party at work. That's who they are. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Make sure to share this video with your friends. Get them connected. Normally during the week, we have an opportunity to go back and forth, and I'll answer your questions and read your comments. So let them know. This is a wholly, fully interactive opportunity to talk about gun rights, to talk about the Second Amendment, and to talk about how we can all come together to make sure that our rights are protected. Once again, this is Craig DeLuz. You guys have fun, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and stay free.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.